Hey everybody, this is Chuck here for DeucesCracked.com, coming at you with some live-action Omaha 8 or better here on the Bovada network. There were actually no games going when I hopped onto the site, but I sat and within around, I don't know, I'd say 15, 20 seconds, I had some heads-up action which became three-handed very, very quickly. We will talk about game creation later on in the series, specifically when we focus a little bit on heads-up play, because I think if you are going to be playing a lot of 08, you need to be at least confident in your heads-up play, just so you can start and create games. Case in point here, there was no action, and now there is. I'm going to spend a lot of time today kind of focusing a little bit on pre-flop review. This is obviously a easily foldable hand from this seat, and try to dig more into adjustments that we hinted at last week and how I might adjust to some showdowns we may find in today's session. So as I mentioned, this game started heads up. I wanted to wait for it to fill up, and I actually played one of the more interesting hands I've played in a very long time. I guess results-wise, you might say. I'm trying to find it on my, here it is, previous hands. Long story short, well, let's see if we can take a flop here with this hand. We do have some high card value, just some reads in general. Just this player is incredibly showdown bound and not really looking to fold very much, which is what we're going to see in this other hand. We're going to be out of position, but I think with ace, king, queen, just three big cards, the 8 is kind of not really doing much, but getting a good price, 5-1. I'm fine calling here pre-flop. I did see this player flop the nut flush and check it back. So just going to make any situation where maybe we're value betting thin after that player was passive an easier bet fold, right? Often if we're making a thin value bet and get raised, we will consider folding, kind of weigh the odds, and it's safe to say in this situation, it's pretty likely that this player probably has it. So we'll look to fold there. We flop pretty well. We could check raise. If this is the board, we're check raising a lot, which I tend to think it is because we're out of position. Villain does check back. As I just mentioned, this player did check back the nuts before, which could turn into an awkward situation now when the 2 comes in on the turn. But I'm just going to go ahead and call because I think I can still have the best high and check fold a lot of rivers. This being one of them. My hand just got a lot worse. I think it's pretty likely we are against, at the very worst, a flush. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold. I'm not looking to try to turn my hand into a bluff there either. I don't think I want to necessarily fold the turn because that card could be good for our opponent's range in some other ways. In other words, maybe this player had aces with 3 of spades and elected to check back that flop because it wasn't good for them, but now it is. And I think that's a logical outcome. And I still have my hand queued up here as we're going to go ahead and fold. So anyway, we're shorthanded, and I opened raised with 10-2-3-4 single suited on the button, and the small blind 3-bet me with the ace 2-2-7. The big blind cold called, and when the flop fell 10-9-9, as we see here with the spade draw, it checked to me. So I elected to try to turn my hand into a bluff. I thought it was reasonable that the small blind could be checking and calling with an overpair of aces, but I can then try to bluff good turn cards like the 8 of spades. And when the 8 of spades fell, I elected to bet again. And finally, when the 7 of spades fell in the river, I thought, this has got to be the worst card for some overpair aces. Even aces with the ace of spades has to fold this one, and there's no way my 10-4 is good. And I bet and got called and scooped. I just thought it was one of the more peculiar hands I've seen in a while. And I'll move this window off to the side here so I can key in on showdowns later on to see what our opponents may have called us with. So the very showdown-bound player in the big blind, you may think that you absolutely need to tighten up a ton on the button, but I think with a hand like King 10, 3, 6, it's enough of a high card hand with some low help to it that I can just make good value bets against this player if they're never really folding. So I can actually extract more value with some of those like on the fringe type hands that I would not really want to open raise against a player. I'd probably raise this King 10, 3, 6. I wouldn't want to raise my looser hands against players who are more active post flop, right? Players that know how to check raise flops and things like that, and be aggressive. In other words, know how to check raise flops. We just click raise, but yeah, I know this is a little bit looser than I'm suggesting in the beginning Omaha 8 or better series, and I would say that's fine, right? Mucking this hand is probably fine as a default. But the hairier situations I get in here, the more interesting spots we can find later on down the road. And this can kind of be like one of the frustrating parts of 08 for a lot of players is, maybe value betting in position there and not really realizing the player's checking and calling with a flush. In the cutoff with a very loose player behind me, I think this is pretty close. I tend to think at these stakes it's likely a fold because I'm so likely to be four-way, but I think my hand still has value, and that's probably a little bit too aggressive to assume that everyone's going to be calling that often. If this 9 was a 10, I think this is a pretty clear raise for us here. Now, despite how showdown bound this player is, I'm not looking to extract much, if any, value with my queens here in position. Just not a great flop for me. I'm expecting a lot of players to have any kind of combination of low cards. Do I want to turn my hand into a bluff now? I still really don't. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for a player to just call with like an ace-4 or an ace something here. And plus I'm only getting 3-1 when it comes to the turn, so it's not like I'm getting incredible odds. I mean, could have potentially gotten these two hands to fold, maybe. I still don't see any room for a continuation bet on the flop there. It's just too poor of a situation, and I think that there's a reasonable enough check call range from these opponents, and on the turn, and I'm never really going to try to bluff them off their hand again on the river. So I'd rather just quit and take my queens to showdown. I actually had the second best hand. A good note there would be that this player cold called with what was it, 10-9. 10-9, 5-2, I believe. Even worse, actually. 10-9, 8-5 with a single suit. So we can expect this player to be, calling 60, 70+% of hands. Here we open one of the worst ace-2s from early position. And flop okay. Not the greatest situation for me. But what's nice is with this many loose players in here, typically if we're five-handed on this flop and if you're in a tight game, you're not in a very good situation, right? Because someone is going to have something pretty good here. Other ace-2 combos are going to be out there. We don't have the ace of diamonds. I mean, someone does, etc. There's a lot of things. But when there's so many loose players in the game, it means we're up against more hands like 10-5 queen and 7-8 jack, 2 or something like that. Just junk hands that are in there. And, the 2 was one of the worst turn cards for us there. So I thought it was a pretty safe spot to go ahead and check and fold when you get this many players calling on the flop. Because even though it is a very loose game, it doesn't mean that we don't have a bunch of good hands from these players. And we see now 4 bets going in. I talk a lot in the beginning 08 series about finding situations where you may find a fundamental misunderstanding of the game in these players' games. Here we see player 5 capping the river with, yes, the straight and the low, but it was kind of obvious that this player had the nut flush, I believed. This player was kind of putting a lot of action, or some flush. Happened to have king high flush plus the wheel with a lot of blockers, so hey, great hand. I don't know if I'm necessarily going to go so nuts about it there, simply because there's also, I believe, player 6 in the pot, pretty close to the whole time. So they had some incentive to jam. And let's see. the seat 6, yeah, went to showdown with 9973. So pocket nines, yeah, and a 37 low. Just very, very poor hand. So I think that this player actually has a little bit more incentive to be jamming there, because you can be a little more confident that you're chopping here, and it's kind of a cooler to get quartered, but kind of free rolling with this player in the pot with us as well. Unfortunately, their stay at our table may be a little bit short-lived if they don't start to run a little bit better. And happy to take a look at a flop with pocket kings here. I do have the king of clubs blocker, which is nice. Something you want to be sure to be making note of. Just something gets better and easier the more you do it. But that being said, our hand really has little to no value here. And this player raising the flop. So what I'm looking for here when I'm looking to make adjustments is to see what this player is raising this flop with, and then compare that to hands that I want to be raising on this flop. So let's say I see this player raise naked 2-3 on this flop. I might not criticize someone that much there. I'm not going to read too much into that. Maybe you're just trying to get value against maybe you have a read on player 5 or something. I think that's a little bit loose, specifically in this limped pot scenario. But maybe we see this player has open limped aces. But now let's say we see this player raise the flop with 7-8 queen. I mean, immediately my bet 3-bet for value range needs to widen, right? I need more hands that I'm going to be bet 3-betting for value. If this player is going to be raising with bottom 2 pair on a flopped low draw, I'm going to flop a flopped low board with a flush draw on it. That's just not nearly as strong a hand as you need in that situation. So your adjustment in that situation should be to jam the pot more. This player actually raised the flop with 7-8 6 deuce. So 2 pair and made 6 low. I tend to view these players as, or how do I say this? They look at a low as almost a Boolean type of variable, right? Either they have it or they don't. And if they have it, a low is good. They want to put more money in if they have any high to go with it. So it's good to be jamming your ace plus made low type hands against them with, because you're going to have good equity in general against their range. And trip queens on the button. If I had to add some kind of bad feature to a game like this, I would. I guess I don't know. That could be bad. I'm trying to think. Rewarding someone for having trips in the hole or something like that, but that is technically a piece of information, right? And on a board like this, if I know you have trips and I have maybe, if someone folded trips, it's a lot less likely someone could maybe have a jack or a queen or something like that. But really, no, just a side note. Apologies. So the game has gone 5-handed now. Probably open up our ranges a little bit. In general, one thing that you want to be looking for right away to start making adjustments against other players at the table is whether or not they A, have a raising range, B, have a limping range. Essentially, do they really have a raising range? You can kind of stop there. Sorry for the redundancy, but so here I'm going to bet top 2 for value. Sorry to sidetrack, but player 1 in particular tends to limp quite a bit and cold call quite a bit. So when this player does put in more money pre-flop, it's very clear that they have a premium holding, even has a button open limping range. So that's the real thing you want to be on the lookout for, is players that play that way that I mentioned in the earlier videos. Essentially, basically play their hand based on a chart or some kind of, okay, this is a limping hand, this is a raising hand, rather than actually try to play poker and play aggressively. Like here for player 1, our big blind defense range is obviously going to tighten up quite a bit, right? We really don't have nearly as much incentive to call pre-flop if this player is still open limping hands and stuff in the cutoff, right? Not that we'd really be too excited about defending this hand. This would be a pretty easy fold pre-flop, but especially against this player who's going to have a stronger hand a lot more often. This is kind of a close spot. Our low blocker is kind of weak. I really feel like this hand maybe just plays okay for a check call. Now that we very likely have the best high hand, I think it's a pretty easy bet here on the turn. And with a live 6 and this player maybe having some 2-pair combos, I think it's okay for us to bet. So 9-9-6 deuce in the limping range is something of note. Now, I'm assuming that this is going to be a good hand, but there's a non-zero chance that this player is just limping everything, and if it's even remotely okay, they're raising. Against that type of player, I would be a lot more likely to lead my king with 67 low because this player is simply going to have so many garbage hands in their range. Right? I'm giving that range that this player limped originally some respect. But as soon as I see them show up, 9-9-6 deuce, I think it's a pretty easy fold there. I'm going to start pushing my value ranges and try to build more pots and do so more comfortably out of position because I have more confidence that my hand is best. So in general, like with adjustments, it's my favorite part of poker, just trying to figure out really what is the problem at the table. Like, what is this player doing well against me? Even better, I think more often is what is this player doing wrong that I can exploit? But that type of approach and kind of solving that problem thereafter is just a lot of fun. And we saw them, they raised the king queen 10-9. So, that's not a hand I'm expecting a very passive player to be too excited about raising very often, if ever. So, possible that our second read is potentially true. I don't think I have enough of a hand to re-isolate here, however, because if I am wrong, it's very bad. And even if I'm right, this hand isn't that good. It could be a good spot for kings plus wheel cards, though, to 3-bet. You really can't get in too much trouble with that hand in position. But we have a 6 here. It's a 4-card game, so it's weird that like one little card looks like it can make a big difference, but you want to have a 4-card hand, and especially when you have a paired hand, it's important that the other 2 cards are good. Video run good here, though, of course, in effect. Wow, okay, kings. This player jonking the jack-jack. This may be our same friend from before who's just back for another ride. But can expect player 1 to be a lot more active. Now, you could just also have a HUD up and look at those stats, but number one, I would like this series to have more live applications. Despite the fact that we are playing online right now, I think the ease of information here allows for me to kind of express what's going on. But also, I think it's better to try to interpret the actions first and then, add the numbers afterwards, if that makes sense, So then you know what that player looks like instead of looking at the numbers and then trying to match up those numbers because sometimes there can be some overlap. And these hands really all just super easy folds pre-flop. And even if you just look at it, most of the board textures, it's not like we're really flopping much ever. And just how bad these hands are. Our buddy unfortunately left. Hopefully they elect to come back, but occasionally 08, just not enough for him. Is clearly, though, a very good game as we see players showing up with a bunch of hands they just shouldn't have. We absolutely need to consider, though, like our range in this seat needs to be pretty tight in general, just because we do have this player on the button. So I'm likely tightening up this would be my under the gun +1 range. It's to kind of just not include my doesn't necessarily flop well type hands, hands I maybe want to try to get an extended steal with and things like that. Probably like the very worst of my. I'm not even considering the very worst of my like Broadway wheel type hands. I probably would want the suited varieties of a lot of like the good king hands. I'm folding, actually just folding those. Yeah, probably playing pretty tight actually. We will be out of position, and I think our best game against this player is just leading a ton. So going to want to have an ace in my hand a lot. I still think the high only hands will be fine. Like I'm still open raising them. I'm not going to start just open limping. I don't think that really accomplishes much. Like we still want to be aggressive and we're still tight and our range still dominates our opponents. A lot of players think like, okay, I'm going to have this player calling a ton, so I'm just going to limp my hands. But I mean, when they're going to call you with 10-8, 4-4, like who cares, right? We just actually want to have a little bit stronger hands, and that's about it. Okay, back from a water break here, and we get to take a flop with pocket fives. So in general, in this situation, as I mentioned in the pre-flop videos, there's really not many flops where I flop a set that I'm actually going to be too excited about leading, specifically in an 08 game. Now, in terms of adjusting, my enthusiasm for leading a small set increases as the players behind me yet to act are looser / worse, right? I'm expecting players to call with a lot more hands. Again, in a game full of tight ranges, on an ace 10-5, if I bet, I'm only really getting called by some pairs of ace hands. So, I make some sense to bet. But if I don't have a low in any capacity, it's going to be difficult for me to want to bet future streets. Any 2, 3, 4 is a tough card for me to bet. But in these games, it's more likely I'm getting called by 10, 6, 7 and lows that can't raise me, and lows that are much less likely to be the best hand. And on top of that, they also have a much greater propensity to call down with worse high hands as well, right? The probability of that player getting away from a hand as bad as like an ace 9-9 8 or something to that effect, it's just a lot lower. And when there's that many extra hands in your opponent's call down range, it's really important that you build the pots more with your big hands. You just have to realize that you have so much more equity because their hands are actually just that much worse. It amazes me that there was a time in my life when I was frustrated by incredibly loose players, and now, like, just as someone who loves 08 so much, it's like your bread and butter essentially, and really any 4-card game, or just any game, right? And even though I'm getting just such an incredible price, I really don't think I even need to bother putting any money in here out of position with this hand. Number one, what I mentioned before, in terms of like leading, I guess to some effect, this hand maybe does have a little bit more value in this lineup, right? Maybe I should have reconsidered that here because I can call only 15 cents into $1.10, giving me, almost 8-1. But even then, I feel like I only actually want to lead like flops, trips, and nuts. Like there's so few board textures. And this hand, in terms of flopping draws, it actually doesn't flop any nut two-way draws. So there's really not many flops I want to be checking and calling, or draws I want to be checking and calling much on. I guess there's maybe a Jack 10 board where I have 8-9, but any real run out there is going to either pair the board or put a low up, and I'm not too excited about drawing in that situation. Or make better nuts, right? As we saw here, this player calling down with ace, king, king, queen, or I'm sorry, something to that effect. Ace, king, king on the Jack 10, 8, 10, etc. board. So I want to have more of a hand because I'm out of position, right? That's going to be my adjustment here, is I need more when I actually hit a flop to be building it, because I'm not expecting anyone to fold. That's a good thing. It just means I need more of a hand to play. And pocket nines, like, I guess you could argue, again, maybe has a little bit more value when you have the button and a lot more players are going to go ahead and call. But I think you could, use the rake as an excuse because you get such a worse price. I'm sorry, it hurts your win rate. But in general, even though we have the button, pocket nines are just not going to be that great. If the 9 was a queen or a jack, it would just be such a better hand. Right? We have really no top pair value in the 10. The 10 is only making straights, but I think in the end, the fact that you play with very loose players that can occasionally be irrational, it takes away from hands that don't have much, if any, nut value, right? Even though we are on the button. We also the pot was small. It was only one limper. Absolutely would have completed this hand though, right? I mean, this is just a little bit easier to flop things, just a little bit stronger. The king high flush is just a lot better too. So there's more boards I'm happy to check call. Because calling like top pair plus backdoor flush draw with some gut shot high is actually pretty sweet. You can't get in too much trouble there. Hopefully we find some spots out of position, though I will be covering more hand examples in future beginning 08 videos. Here our paired 8 makes our hand a pretty easy fold. We see this player 2 open limp. We haven't really discussed this player much. We will certainly be on the lookout for what types of hands this player is open limping. That's really going to dictate the types of hands we want to be raising thereafter. I mentioned this in one of the other videos, but there are occasions where this player is limping hands that are actually better than a good chunk of your raising range. Doesn't mean we can't raise them, right? We're still isolating them and we have the button. If we have a good feel for how that player plays, it can help us as well. Here's an interesting blocker situation, right? Here's a situation where having the flush actually hurts us, right? The fact that we have the queen of hearts and the ace of hearts just makes fewer combinations of flushes that our opponents may actually want to call us down with. Especially in a situation where you have a full house and you have the ace of hearts and you block the fact that someone can maybe have ace 2 of hearts that wants to jam because they have the nut flush plus the nut low. Now, as illogical as that may seem because the board is paired, I think that's something you find a lot of players doing in 08 as well, right? Just thinking about how good is my hand? Well, I have the nut flush plus the nut low, so my hand is incredible. I should jam. But the board's paired. They just didn't think that far. So it's something to keep an eye out for. And let's take a look at a couple of the pre-flop hands. Nothing too interesting. This player did open limp the king 2 3 4 single suited. I honestly can't fault the player that much. Really, not all that bad. I mean, I would fold, but we don't know that this player is necessarily that loose or anything yet if I just see that one hand. The way I like to think of these things is look at the board, think of the worst hand you could possibly play or want to call with in that situation. Did this player call with that hand? Well, if they did, it's safe to say they're calling pretty much anything, right? You can use that same logic to kind of deduce someone's ranges pre-flop pretty quickly, right? If I raise the button and the big blind defends with queen 9 8. Well, we discussed this in previous video, queen 9 8 4. It's safe to say that they call with pretty much everything in that situation. Here, when I see this player open limp king 2 3 4, my reaction in terms of can't really blame him. It's just that I'm not expecting this player to really show up with any strange cards quite yet. And the importance of those strange cards is when we start evaluating our value betting range and how wide it is / should be or needs to be. Because the one thing you cannot do in limit poker is leave bets on the table. It is a funny game in that way. It's just one bet. You can only get one button, right? So you have to get all of the bets. It's about creating good lines that trap players, build pots, and increase your equity. Here, I would consider this a pretty big trap hand from early position. You are double suited, but the paired 7 is not good. To some degree, the pocket 7s, like with an ace 2 suited, it's a little bit of help, right? Because now I can flop a set plus the low, and there's a couple more board protectors I can jam if my ace 2 makes the low. there's some combination of 3 through 8 on the board with 3 individual cards. That being said, it doesn't mean we'd rather have them over, a king, queen suited or something like that. It's just the value in them. But 4 or 5 going along with them doesn't do us much, if any help, and the suits really aren't helping, right? The suits here are more kind of just an added bonus. In the same way, if the 4 and 5 were ace of clubs and the 2 of diamonds, the 7 high flush, the 7-2 of diamonds it's more like an added bonus, right? We're not excited about it, but that's what makes it one of the premium versions of ace 2 7 7. That's that little bit of extra equity that goes into it. And, again, here, don't really think I have much incentive, if any, to call a raise from one of these players. I'll obviously be happy to take a flop. The nice value in a big suited hand, and what makes this hand so much better, like against this type of player, is if I do want to peel with my straight draw, thinking I have a decent shot at the high because the pot is big and a lot of players are in there with me, having a flush draw to go along with it or a backdoor flush draw could be just enough, just a little bit extra. And obviously, the bigger the card, the better, because then you can actually turn trips, etc. Now, I'm electing to lead the flop here because I really can't count on anyone actually betting. And everything we've seen to this point is that we should expect every player here to call. I will bet every turn card, maybe safe for a 9, but in terms of I'm also including jacks and 10s, which I think is pretty aggressive, but I mean, we've already seen some turn or river calls that just say players are really not willing to fold much, if any. And every little bit that adds to the board just adds to possible hands that these players are not going to fold. Right? A lot of those 9x combos that never fold the flop, well, all the ones that have heart set in them in there now call as well. Facing a raise, all I can do is call. On the turn or on the flop. I would not be excited about jamming this hand, by the way. Really not a good situation for me. I think I still have enough value to bet. Now, we haven't talked about the river much at this point in beginning 08, but one nice thing about this situation is against this villain's slow plays and against this villain's full houses, I actually have a low to go. And that is really what gave me enough confidence to just go ahead and bet there. And this player actually just, backed into not low. I'm thinking. Now this player 6 may, that previous player who called so light, maybe the same player. And my initial reaction is maybe this player should be calling to try to invite this player to call, right? Here we've got to call 40 cents up. This player raised, and we have Broadway, wheel, but we have one of the worst versions of it. This is, a player we haven't played much with, but still out of position. I want, like I said, a little bit stronger of a hand, and now in a raised pot, it's even more so. And just want to go ahead and fold there. Oh, so my point before about that player's decision to raise, that's assuming that this player actually folds something, right? If this player is actually going to call with any 9 and any low, then that's a great raise. You should absolutely jam the pot there, expecting this player to call. And I think that's the right play, given what we've seen, if that is that player that's actually calling that wide. It's a good adjustment. It's just, you're very confident that your low hand is the best. My range is essentially full houses, or, I think 6-7 was rather deceptive there. Again, though, if this player did slow play with a full house, the non-low combos that also have the full house, I get half the pot. So I was comfortable calling there. But yeah, good adjustment to charging this player. We do have the royal flush blocker, one of the more irrelevant facts. Although now when you think about it, how good is a game? These are moments that you should absolutely keep in mind. I mean, we have 1 heart. There are 4, 5. There's only 8 left in the deck. That would mean every player would need a flush here. And and there'd be well for every player to have a flush here, rather there would be no hearts left in the deck. Of course, people could have two pairs and pair up with straight draws, et cetera, et cetera. But as much as you wanting to call when you're getting a better price because there's more players in the pot, also you need to keep in mind that just means players actually have better hands. It's more likely you could potentially be drunk dead. And under the gun +1 here did actually have the nut flush. So here, in terms of continuation betting, not one of the better flops for my hand at all. Here's a spot where I'm happy to have the king and 10 with my hand because it gives me more turn cards that could potentially give me top pair, which have a lot more value against an incredibly loose player. Now, I talked a lot today about increasing our value range, and that's exactly what I'm doing here with my ace-3, because I expect these two players to be so loose that my ace-3 is that much more likely to be the best hand in terms of the low hand. And I think if I actually hit a king or a 10, I scoop pretty often. This is a pretty close spot, right? Any combination of two... there's so many lows that just came in because now we just play a live 3, right? So my ace king is so likely. This is very close. If I had a better read on this player, I would probably bet. Yeah, I'm wondering if I missed a bet there. That was very because I'm rather confident that my ace king is actually the best high hand. Like no one built the pot. I'm expecting both of these players to. I should have talked about that more a little bit. Sorry. On that flop, I'm expecting on that board texture rather. I'm expecting on the flop or turn to hear from an 8 from either one of these opponents. Right? Everyone loves flopping 3 of a kind. I'm expecting one of these opponents to put some money in the pot. So on the river, that means my hand is just that much more likely best, my ace-king. So now I have ace-king plus a live 3. If my high hand is just the best that often, then I should just bet and be happy. And on occasion, my live 3 is actually good. Now, one thing we should actually talk about, though, is the fact that the big blind had ace-2. Which was a better low draw than ours, and they just check called it. Now, because I didn't expect either player had an 8, I thought my king or 10 could give me the best high hand. I had a little bit more confidence in betting my ace-3, right? I'll pop up this this hand here very quickly. So if my ace-3 instead had, on this board texture, maybe if I had like an ace-3-3-6 or something, if I was really only relying on the ace-3, right? Ace-3, ace-3-6, something like that. I mean, something where I'm not expecting my high hand to be good, really ever, nothing that can really improve. I would be a lot less likely to bet. But because I had the king 10 to go along with it, and I thought these players were both that loose. Now, I'm not going to let one little ace-2 throw me completely off my game plan, right? I'm not all of a sudden going to, completely tighten up. But if I'm on the fence at any point, not that this player's gone, who really cares, but if you're on the fence at any point against a player like that, I would look to give them a little bit more credit. Here I elected to call the small blinds raise because I do have position and I have ace-6 against this player and I'm expecting this player to call and I end up getting limp raised. This kind of really blew up in my face and the pot got kind of big pretty quick and I kind of have to call. Once the pot gets that big, there's a lot of flops though. I'm just going to have to fold and I just, put a bunch of bets in. I think preflop could actually just be a fold. Make this 10 any other Broadway card, and make this 6 at just a 5, and it's a really trivial call. With extra money, in the pot, it's very likely that that's fine to just call there. Here, I mean, I have a lot more high value with a suited queen and a king. Like, there's just some flops I can flop okay on. Maybe see some turn cards. Now, in this situation, what kind of stinks for me is if the bet comes from seat 3, if it checks through and I want to call once, it's kind of an awkward spot, right? Because there's a lot of players left to act. Here, when it goes bet raise, I have a pretty easy fold. I'm getting such a good price there pre-flop, and this hand has a lot more flops that are going to kind of play themselves, where I'm going to flop well, and that means I'm a lot more excited about calling. Wow, the ace trip 8s with the suit flops the case 8 too. Feeling a little bit better about my ace 10-10-6 call, and maybe should have considered 3-betting it. Don't think I can 3-bet if this player raises. I'm wondering if this is too loose to isolate this player with here. With another player in the pot, this feels pretty tight on the button. I mean, and what good is really ace-6 doing me there? I mean, with a 5, it's pretty trivial. But the 9 is a bad card too. It's just a little deceptive. Seems to work so well, some combination of ace and low and all those things. But I mean, these board textures are just a nightmare. And it seems like you have an okay hand, but 2-4. I mean, 2-5 is a better low draw than yours right now. So is 3-5. So, yeah. Probably go a couple more orbits here. I want to spend a little more time talking about adjustments. We'll find maybe 1 or 2 more examples for the session. Hopefully, a lot of what I'm saying is making sense. If any of you guys or gals have questions about making adjustments at the table, maybe how you counteract someone's strategy, definitely feel free to post them here in the video thread or in the Mixed Game Forum thread on DeucesCracked. I think it's a good thing a lot of players do when they post and say, this is how I'm trying to adjust this player's play, because it's very easy to, maybe make a counterintuitive play, try to do something that just isn't right. We can take a look at some open limping ranges here, which is always one of my favorite things to do. Queen Jack 4-8 and Queen 7 4-5. And we had Ace Queen 9-6. If players are limping that loose, should I be raising that hand there? I still think it's pretty close. With all the money in the middle. I mean, with the nut suit, I think it's really snap, just raise. Just play poker, bet the flop. Yeah, that's probably correct. Now, I would say probably the worst thing you could do would be to be building the pots and then folding too much. So as long as you have a decent feel for the way these players are playing post-flop, I don't think it's that big of a deal. Here we get led into when we flop bottom 2 in an ace-6 low. Just keeping to, we just continue picking up slivers of equity. If this player bets again, I'm pretty fine with folding. This is a good situation where we can give player 1 a little bit of respect. Maybe they have some kind of low type hand here that's better than ours. And this player just had 34, which was better, plus top set of jacks. But it's a pretty thin call for us there with just naked ace-6 low. And I'm a lot more comfortable when I'm giving one player behind us a little bit more credit. That being said, this player called down with pocket kings, which I think is pretty poor. Very likely this player was replaced while I was talking. One huge disadvantage to HUD Plus. Try to talk on video. In general, I would say when I'm playing, it's a lot easier for me to pay attention. For now going forward, I can maybe just include active notes on the players so we know it's the same one. This way, while I continue to look off screen and load up previous hand histories, we can avoid that. But in hopefully the lesson still holds, obviously. And yeah, we'll probably go one more orbit here, although this game is clearly very good with a lot of what we see showing up here. Happy to take a flop with this hand. Again, just lots of little perks to make this a premium version of an all-Broadway hand. I would prefer the 10 be a jack. Either one of these be the same, just because those are better hands. I don't want to flop a set of 10s nearly as often, but in terms of that player calling down pocket kings, by the way, it is one thing I do find is players play the high hands the absolute worst, those board textures. I had an embarrassing hand during a big World Series event in '08 where I basically called the river with trips on a flush board, and the villain said, more or less, I just have the high, and I just like moaned almost. You have a high? It was a funny moment for me, and I was like, all right, you're never gonna play high board textures that bad again, Chuck. Obviously I do all the time, because sometimes in poker you make mistakes, but I give them a lot more respect now, and I pay a lot more attention to players playing them very poorly. And as loose as these players are, our hand was actually just that bad on the flop. I guess we can call here for 15 cents with 2 wheel cards, but it's Badoogie with 7-8 next to it. It's the worst version of 3-4 offsuit there is. I do not think this is really that bad to call, given it's only 15 cents into 85. So I'm getting better than 5-1. So kind of a snap mistake or snap fold. I will say, I did mention earlier, I hope for a lot of the series to be applicable to live, and find it should be. But the rate considerations online, specifically with 25 cent, 50 cent, could be a factor. Obviously, it depends on what stakes you're playing live, but if this was like 15-30 or something to that effect, I'm absolutely calling the $5 there. I hope that's yeah, I hope that's understood. I mean, should be understood. And a big problem with a lot of these hands is even if we are flopping okay, we still have to like call flops with that hand, right? I don't want to be peeling with like a 34 low. It's just not a profitable decision. So I'd rather just not even bother playing that hand in that situation if I'm not going to be able to play it profitably. Certainly want to kick myself for the, I'm just trying to think if the ace queen 9-6 hand, if I should be playing stuff like that against players this loose. I still don't think so. I think we just want a little bit more in what we take to the table, because our value isn't going to come from those super duper thin, like razor thin bets with the very, very worst part of our range. We can make some thin value bets, but we'll just thin value bet just means we're expecting worse hands to call. Doesn't mean we need to have worse hands in our range as well. And hopefully wind up with one more playable hand here before we wrap up for the session. So what kind of hands then, adjustments-wise, would I want to be calling? Well, because, if I have to be able to play some more stuff. With the queen 9 suited there and the ace 6, I think it's actually pretty close, right? If it was a little bit better, I think calling really can't be that bad. If you have like ace queen 10 or something that affect you, and you can hit more Broadway board textures. Just slightly worse versions of a lot of hands, especially when you're going to have position, can become playable. Doesn't mean I'm going to go anywhere near my small pocket pairs. I want to avoid reverse implied odds hands. Maybe you could say you don't want more than 2 cards between like 6, 7, 8, 9. Something to that effect. Your 2-3, your 2-4, 5 jack with a suit. becomes a little bit more playable for a limp on the button when you know there's a ton of players in the pot. I'm not that excited about doing it, truth be told, but I really wouldn't fault anyone. And I think this hand here, even though it's pretty weak and a lot of players would limp, I just think this is going to create so many profitable situations for me post-flop where I can push my equity edge against these two characters. We know this player's in the pot already. We got call behind us, but like, it's really not going to be too tough to play this hand post-flop for us. And we're just going to wind up in so many good situations where we can bet, and walk away with 50+% of the pot. All in all, not a very good flop for us. If it checks to me, I will bet. Number one, I expect these players to call incredibly wide. Number two, this is a bit just pretty much a victory. Like getting the button and being able to play the turn and river with no one behind me is really good, especially with a very good backdoor low draw like I have. Adjustments wise, value betting wise, a turn 5 or 4 or 3 could be a value bet in this game, just because we could potentially have the best hand plus the nut low draw, as is here. Anything that doesn't give me a low draw, I would consider a pretty bad turn card, but I still think the bet on the flop was money well spent. In terms of the button, and one of the worst turn cards ripping off. And what are the benefits to passive play? Just this player essentially let us play that pot out the way we wanted to, so to speak, right? We were allowed to just bet the flop with him and not be punished. If we did get check raised, you only have a backdoor low. So we would really just have to do pot odds math on the flop, and they're not very good for you. But this game is incredibly passive, and these players are incredibly loose, so I'm expecting to just check and call a ton, which is why I had the confidence to just go ahead and put the bet in the flop. So we went through a couple of adjustments at the table. We went through a couple of different things that came up specifically in this live session. Anything comes up in your sessions, you can go ahead and put them on the forums, post them in this video thread. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the beginning Omaha 8 or Better series. Hope you enjoyed this little break into some live ghost action. Like I said, the game was not going, and I started it up, and we see clearly that the game I started up is a very, very good game. And as we continue this series, we will start to cover more heads up action, how to start, and some three-handed scenarios. So everyone will be comfortable starting their own games, creating good action, and winning big pots. Until next time, this is Chuck for DeucesCracked.com, and I'll see you on the forums.